Alex Marlowe. Senator Tom Cotton is on the line with me, Republican from Arkansas. Senator, great to have you back on the broadcast.
Hey, Alex, it's good to be back on with you.
So you've had some long days here with these Senate hearings. Could you talk to us a little bit about what it's like to be in the room? What's the vibe? What's it like? This is something that is obviously you haven't gone through this process. What are your thoughts from inside?
Yeah, you could say that again. It's long days. Of course, it's not very hard work. You just sit there and listen to a bunch of lawyers or talk on the president's side or politicians talk on the Democrat side. So there's many tougher jobs you could have, although last week in particular, it got pretty repetitive with Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler repeating the same points over and over again. President's lawyers have been a lot better. They've addressed kind of in a systematic fashion the case against the president. I thought they've done a very good job of taking apart that case without belaboring it, without going over and over again. So, for instance, yesterday, Pam Bondi did a very good job of explaining just how shady the dealings of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden dealing with the Burisma company in Ukraine were, and while Donald Trump and anyone else who looks at that had a legitimate reason to think there's a serious conflict of interest there. So I think the president will wrap his case today, and then we'll have a couple days of questions for senators.
Yeah, this is the point that I really wanted to address with you, which was, what is it like as a senator, which is supposed to be the more elevated of the two houses, to hear the case made by who we refer to as the impeachment throuple, Pelosi, Schiff, Nadler. Pelosi isn't one of the managers, but Schiff and Nadler, who are really carrying the burden, to just make the same points that they had made in the House a few weeks ago that everyone saw on television. I'm sure you saw some of the live hearings as well. They didn't really add anything new at all. They just made the same case to you. And then, of course, this was celebrated by our media. But this is, I found it at least mildly condescending to the senators. It's as if you all live under some sort of a rock.
Yeah, and both Adam Schiff, who showed last week why he so richly deserves his nickname of Shifty Schiff, and Jerry Nadler had that tone of lecturing and hectoring. Even, as I said, they just repeated themselves over and over and over again. And in some cases were completely illogical. I can't tell you how many times they said both, on the one hand, we have to have witnesses. We need more witnesses. Where are the witnesses? And on the other hand, our case is overwhelming, and the president doesn't even present evidence against it. Well, both of those things can't be true. Or when they're saying that the Senate has to call witnesses, this is your constitutional duty. It was like, well, why didn't they call these witnesses? They started this almost 4 months ago. They probably could have had court decisions already if there were any assertions of privilege. But just the consistent dishonesty from Adam Schiff, using selected and clipped quotations or videos that are out of context, or sometimes just getting things wrong entirely. Like, Lev Parnas last week released a bunch of text messages, and one of them referred to Mr. Z, and Adam Schiff's talking about how that's Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. No, it turns out that Mr. Z is the corrupt Ukrainian oligarch who is Hunter Biden's patron, which, by the way, they say is completely ruled out. You can't possibly think that Hunter Biden, of all people, would do anything wrong. You can't even possibly discuss it. It's an illegitimate distraction. It's in many ways a replay of what you and the American people saw in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, exactly, and a incredibly boring replay at that. I want to ask you more of your take, but what exactly are the mechanics? So today will be the last day. We'll be hearing from the president's team, I believe, and then what happens? Will there be witnesses? Do you get the impression that there'll be witnesses? Is there going to be a question and answer period? What does the rest of the week look like?
So I don't think many senators are ready to jump to that conclusion yet, because there is so much left today. So the president, I think, has about 8 or 9 hours left on his case today. That ends the opening statement portion of the trial, and then we move to a period of 16 hours of questions for senators. And this will happen just like it did in the Clinton trial. So that'll happen over 2 days, most likely Wednesday and Thursday. Senators will submit written questions. And the Chief Justice will read those questions. So it would say, for instance, Senator Cotton and Senator X and Senator Y and Senator Z ask of the House managers the following question. And then if the Chief Justice follows the precedent of Chief Justice Rehnquist in the Clinton trial, those answers will be for up to 5 minutes each. So I think what I learned yesterday is that in the Clinton trial, both sides had a chance both sides had a chance to ask 53 questions. So, over 100 questions were asked, and I suspect we probably see something similar on Wednesday and Thursday.
Are you going to submit any? And if so, do you have any? Do you care to share what you're going to submit?
I don't want to give the House managers a preview of what we might be asking, so they can be prepared for it. But yeah, I think you can count on both me and most senators submitting questions.
Sure. Great. Well, we'll look forward to that.
Probably to both sides. Probably to both sides as well. I mean, I think one thing now that the president's lawyers have explained just what an obvious, glaring, serious conflict of interest Joe Biden had in dealing with Ukraine. Well, his son was on the board of this corrupt Ukrainian oligarch who was being investigated by the very person Joe Biden fired. I think it's time for the House managers to address those very troublesome facts.
Yeah, I believe that is exactly the case. And I think all this hinges on the fact that the investigation into Hunter Biden, or the president suggesting that perhaps maybe we should look into why that was canceled, is illegitimate. All this comes down to go ahead.
You're exactly right, Alex. This is an example of why Adam Schiff is known as Shifty Schiff. He keeps using the phrase dig up dirt on a political opponent. That's not what happened. It's not like Donald Trump just out of the blue called the Ukrainian president and say, hey, will you manufacture some political dirt on Bernie Sanders or Andrew Yang? I mean, the Obama State Department had grave concerns about Hunter Biden working for this corrupt Ukrainian oligarch. And he and his buddy going to the State Department to lobby them. So this didn't just come out of thin air. This is not a fiction of someone's imagination. Hunter Biden was working for a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch. Days after that oligarch's home was raided and his property seized by Ukrainian authorities, they were in an overdrive with the U.S. government, and Joe Biden was on the phone 3 times with the president of Ukraine. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, that prosecutor is fired. So this is not a question of digging up dirt. This is a question of getting to the bottom of what is an obvious and glaring conflict of interest.
Yeah, precisely. And this is the point that we were dying on the show to hear the White House counsel make. And they did make it. And it was very heartening for us to see that Burisma came up and Hunter Biden's corruption came up. And they really painted a pretty clear picture, at least from my vantage point, that Joe Biden had no business being in charge of Ukraine policy while his son was getting rich off of Ukraine.
Absolutely not, Alex. And, frankly, it still would have been unseemly and kind of typical Washington featherbedding if Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma because of his last name, as he has said. But the day that he got on that board, Joe Biden said to Donald Trump, you know what, I can no longer do Ukraine policy. I'm going to have to take a step back and recuse myself. We wouldn't be here because there'd really be no question of Joe Biden using the power of the U.S. government to benefit his son's patron. Why did Joe Biden not take that simple step? I mean, it's the most basic step that any person in government would expect to take when their family member is working for a company.
Hey, Senator, you're a Harvard Law grad, aren't you?
I am, but I joined the Army after law school to redeem myself.
That's great. Did you? Did you study under Professor Dershowitz?
I did not. I went to a couple of his lectures. I got to say, Alan Dershowitz, agree with him or disagree with him, is a deeply learned man. He's a rigorous scholar, and he's a captivating speaker. And I thought he laid out a pretty compelling case last night.
He did, and I'm struck by a couple of things. That he, first of all, was not a supporter of the president. He's a Democrat. I mean, he's been on the show, so he's clearly in the more moderate realm. But he said he changed his mind on a non-criminal impeachment, which I thought was pretty striking, because this is a big part of the case that Ken Starr laid out, that the impeachment, they're not arguing any crimes, it's not bipartisan, and there's no due process. Those are kind of the 3 legs of the stool that Ken Starr laid out. And Professor Dershowitz saying that he had this revelation later in life, I found that to be a pretty key moment that's kind of been glossed over, at least from my vantage point.
Yeah, I think he was intellectually honest and upfront. He had said in the Clinton trial that impeachment does not require a crime. As he acknowledged last night. The reason I believe that is the weight of academic consensus, left-wing academic consensus, of course. He said, but I never studied the question closely because it wasn't relevant in the Clinton trial when the articles of impeachment did, in fact, allege specific crimes, perjury and obstruction of justice. Now, having gone back and read the historical record and carefully analyzed the evidence, he has realized that he thinks he was wrong in 1999, that to impeach a president actually does require a specific crime, not a vague political allegation like abuse of power or obstruction of Congress. Now, again, he was up front, too, that is contrary to the weight of left-wing academic opinion. But there's a more prudential point here as well. Even if you disagree with Alan Dershowitz's historical conclusion, you can still recognize that every other impeachment in our history has, in fact, alleged specific crimes. And as a prudential matter, perhaps we ought not be impeaching presidents in the absence of such crimes. Even if you don't think it's constitutionally required, it might be something that's practically wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And Senator, we can go on this topic for hours, I'm sure, but I want to ask you also about the coronavirus, which you gave a exclusive quote to Breitbart where you're suggesting that we need to suspend travel from China into the United States. I'm 100% with you on this, or at least you suggested the administration consider a travel ban from China. I don't understand why this is not a bigger thing. Have you spoken to your colleagues? Is there any momentum behind this? This strikes me as the biggest no-brainer that no one's talking about.
We had a long conversation during our dinner break last night with it. I can tell you that many of my colleagues have not followed it quite as closely as I have, and they were alarmed by some of the things that I have learned in the last few days. Like, for instance, it would appear that the origin story about this starting in the fish market in Wuhan is not correct. As one epidemiologist said, that virus went into the fish market before it came out of the fish market. It further would appear that persons infected with coronavirus can transmit it before it is symptomatic, which is very dangerous from an epidemiological standpoint. So, yes, I believe the administration should begin to plan for the prospect of having to suspend all non-essential travel from China to the United States. In addition, we and Europeans should be asking the Chinese government to allow us to send our experts into Wuhan so we can try to get to the bottom of this and help identify and crash course a vaccine that will protect our people and, frankly, protect China from having a pandemic.
Exactly right. Senator Tom Cotton, I'm with you on this one. So keep us posted, please. And thanks so much for joining us on Breitbart News Daily.
Will do. Thank you.